after this brief background, what I'm going to do is obviously go through some of the slides, and in this discussion today, we are going to be looking at covering the learning outcome one, which is to understand theories of leadership and management. So this is quite a vast topic, and what I've done is I've created a few slides which primarily will cover the indicative content which has been given that we need to study and understand this as a concept. But along with that, once we end this session, I'm going to try and send you one or two handouts which are going to be 10 to 12 pages, and they will neatly and nicely summarize some of the concepts of leadership and concepts of management, how the differentiation between the two happens, and where are the challenges that we face today in modern organizations, which will be directly related to the assessment criteria that we are looking at doing, looking at reading through in this particular unit. Now, I have got one or two other handouts which I would want to bring into the discussion, is because sometimes this particular topic becomes too mundane and we talk about leadership. What is leadership? And we'll discuss that. But also at some stage, if we are to become effective leaders, or if we have to be in a particular position wherein people see you as leaders, you need to be clearly able to identify what are the skill sets, the attributes, the traits that you need to have, which actually exhibit your personality as being a leader. So there is a comprehensive skills analysis handout that we have, and in this handout, which I'm going to send you across on the email, and you'll find it on Moodle, would be useful at some stage to basically look at going through this and just sitting down and do a bit of tick mark to say, and whether you use this, you enjoy this, you have a strength in this, or you're looking at developing this. So this will be a bit of a self-analysis of your own skills, but the one that we want to be focusing on is basically leadership skills. But when we look at a lot of different tests which are put in place today when people are recruited in senior management positions, we look at a lot of organizations, recruitment companies, they look at specifically going through your CV, they pick up a lot of keywords in terms of skills and traits and attitudes, or basically the skills that they need to look at which clearly relate to leadership or your management experience that you're actually highlighting in your CV or your resume. Now, those are the keywords they pick out, and when they pick out those keywords, the first step in terms of the interviews that you face, or when you go in for a job interview, are those key skills and attributes which you get questions on. So how do we assess leadership skills? This particular handout will help you comprehensively. If you answer it honestly, this will help you comprehensively discover your own skills or areas that you feel that you have strengths in, or you need to further develop these areas. Because sometimes when you say, as an example, if I say that I have leadership skills, and you're asked to highlight, how do you say, could you give me an example of leadership skill? So if you have to think deep and you take a pause and you cannot think of an example that where you have exhibited leadership skills, that means you don't, or in some cases you have exhibited those skills, but it's not been done that frequently that it kind of is fresh in your memory. So when we look at the corporate world, when we look at the private sector, the public sector, and when you look at leadership skills, for example, if I just go down to the topic of Brexit for a moment, we see our own Prime Minister actually exhibiting leadership skills because she's trying to get a consensus in the Parliament to try and agree the members of Parliament to her own plan. Now, this and hosting of the parties in terms of when she hosted the 200 MPs of Labour, Labour Party to try and convince them to win their vote, is an example of how she is trying to now build cross-party consensus to try and get the members of Parliament behind her plan. Now, that's an example of a leadership skill. Now, there are loads of other things that we do not see which are happening in background, but what we get to see very clearly is that the person initiating this as a process, taking the helm and saying that, okay, I am going to see this through, or I am making efforts to see this through, is showing or exhibiting some skills which kind of show, when I say, and if I have to break that down, what kind of leadership skills she's showing. She's putting in a lot of efforts. She's quite resolute in the fact that she wants to achieve, a win when the next in the next week when the vote happens. She's showing a lot of commitment to getting the, say for example, Britain leaving the EU, but she's showing commitment primarily from her side and her party side to be able to get this deal and get people or members of parliament behind her plan. So things like commitment, things like long-term vision, bringing out a lot of white papers which are being brought out by the bureaucracy in terms of people working within the members of parliament, different departments, to say if we don't have a deal, this is what will happen, and then laying out a bit of a plan to say that if we get this, this is where we go in the next 19 months, and that is all a part of her portrait of leadership skills, wherein she's showing some of the skills and traits which are required to be a leader or to be a person in that position to be called a leader. And that is where I think this particular handout will help you examine and evaluate your own personal skills when we look at leadership. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because if you look at, one of the tasks given in the assignment related to the unit would be to primarily look at assessing leadership skills. And how do you assess leadership skills? You have to look at certain, questionnaires, formats, and that is where you basically end up filling those questionnaires, doing a bit of a SWOT in terms to see that where you see your strengths are, your weaknesses are, what are the gap areas, and what are the areas that you need to develop, will actually help pinpoint, and basically help you understand whether you have managerial skills, you have leadership skills, and then we break them down. And this particular handout that I have will have a correlation to what skills leaders require, and we will cover that as well. So this is something that I'm going to send that across, and this will hopefully become a part of your assessment when you send that over.
Okay.
Now, let's go back into the unit, because you will see me dipping in and dipping out of some of the slides, because the topic in this particular unit is quite diverse. So we have to bring in a lot of aspects to be able to understand. And I think I'm pretty sure that a lot of you would be able to contribute, because some of you work in positions within different companies or have roles and responsibilities wherein you are either supervising or working with members of staff which report directly to you. So we'll look at some of those instances. Now, giving you a bit of a background here, what I want to be able to do is get into some of the definitions, because as a topic, a lot of research which is currently happening on leadership and management, but we are going to be focused on things which are related to the 21st century, things which we can see are happening in our own with this particular decade. Now, if I have to start off with a simple concept, what is the definition of leadership, or how do we define leadership? There are various definitions which have been put forward. One of the ones that I would say that, if I have to literally say, people when they are put into positions or situations which put them into a bit of a corner, and they know how to come out of that particular situation, requires leadership skills, because you need to be able to understand that situation, the problem, look at that issue, solve it, basically. When I say, you have to solve it, means you have to find a resolve to, diffuse that situation or maybe solve that problem, and then show certain traits that are required to be able to, come out of that situation. And one of the things would be again, going back to the example, when we look at Brexit happening now in the Parliament, the government has faced two successive defeats on, the amendment and the tax side of the bill, which has been introduced by Yvette Cooper and some of the other MPs. Now, in order for Theresa May not to be dissuaded by that process, she's still continuing, she's finding the motivation, she's finding the inspiration, and she's trying to garner support from fellow MPs or members of the Parliament to be able to still push through with her plan. Even though when you see the news coverage, it basically says that, there is a very, very bleak chance of the plan actually being approved in the Parliament when it comes to vote next week. So when you look at leadership, how do we define leadership? We define leadership, there are loads of definitions. The one that I picked up from Wikipedia is that, and it's current and related to the times that we are in, is that it is the talent of the person or the individual which allows the individual to be proactive, self-motivated, and the person is able to find the inspiration to generate support, which allows the person and the team that he has in terms of support to go towards, achieve tasks, or say achieve tasks, or basically look at achieving a particular goal for the organization. And that person would show some sort of leadership abilities, and these abilities would be translated in the form of either skills, traits, attitude, and or behavior that the person is exhibiting. Now, if we relate this to the 21st century definition and what we look at in terms of competencies required, in particular for, let's put it this way, leaders who basically look at exhibiting these traits, there are a few competencies which have been identified, and these include things like, the leaders who work within large organizations, companies, because businesses have become global or they transcend geographies nowadays. So we look at, they need to have a global mindset, an open mindset or a global mindset. They need to be able to understand competencies which are in them and in the people around them in the teams that they work. They also need to be having traits which allow them to act as a mentor or act as a coach, sometimes when they need to exhibit these qualities or have people behind. And last but not least, we also look at some of the other things, which is that they need to have a thinking methodology, which basically allows them to look at bringing in inputs from various other fields, which allows the leadership to become successful. Things like technology, the use of technology, use of innovation, things like multitasking, the ability to take risk. And one such ability to take risk is seen in 21st century leaders when we look at, for example, millennial organizations, organizations which are led by very young people, as against people who have a number of years of experience, or decades of experience under their wings. And then, to a certain extent, people who are not averse to taking risk. So when you look at, Elon Musk, for example, when you look at Jeff Bezos of Amazon, you look at Mark Zuckerberg. Now, these people they are not just innovators, but they have the ability to take, massive risks to try out things which could be successful, or which are going to be, driving against what normal people would find it as a normal. So here's some of the competencies which are required to work within global organizations, so to drive multi-billion pound businesses. We do see that some of these qualities are ingrained in the leaders which are at the helm of driving these organizations forward, and they tend to be people in the very senior position, because they have the access to information in terms of data and knowledge, which allows them to take decisions to move the organization in tune with the times and obviously the situations within our economy. Now, in context to this, because when we say leadership, we also use the word management. Let's look at defining the word management as well. Now, management comes from the, if I just look at the word manage, you're given a problem or a situation to manage. Sometimes you're delegated with tasks wherein you have to manage, and you're not given the full side of the story, but you've been asked to manage things and take it to completion. So what we get to see here is that sometimes you will find people who have the ability to be able to take control of things, wherein these control of things does not necessarily mean that they have been given all the ins and outs of the situation. But they are thrown into the deep sea and they've been asked to manage a particular situation, and what they do is they are masters at managing coordination. They're masters in managing, obviously, these situations wherein they look at pulling out some armor from their armory. When I say some armor, again, I'm alluding to the fact that we are talking about, skills and trade, and they finally look at, accomplishing goals. A very simple example that I would see, and we see it in our day-to-day lives, is that you have a situation wherein you walked into a store, you've gone to a bank, or you've gone to a particular location wherein you're looking at customer services, you're not happy with something that you purchased. And what tends to happen is if you're not happy, you raise your concern. At some stage, there's a person which comes back, walks in from behind the desk to basically take over, and then tries to diffuse that problem, or by basically looking at diffusing that situation. And that person, in most cases, when we look at, let's say, you've been to Tesco's or Sainsbury's, and you have a manager which comes down from the behind, and obviously then tends to take up this particular problem to try and solve it, and either offers you a refund or apologizes. But at the end of it, they take over from a colleague which is there, and that person having in terms of very little background in terms of what has happened or what the situation is, just because there is a bit of an agitation or because somebody has raised the voice, the manager steps in and obviously takes control of that situation. So what we do get to see is that people who have the art of guiding, if I go into the definition, and individuals or group of employees, by looking at, they're able to,
slides you need to do is rewrite them, and that's that part done. Next week is number 2, and all those slides you need to rewrite, and that becomes number 2, and then the week of that.
In this case, what they're able to do is basically, achieve an outcome which is to please that customer, and obviously, be able to, let's put it this way, diffuse that situation by offering, a solution to the customer wherein he's able to salvage maybe the reputation of the company, or in that case, that situation, and is able to better manage it. So people in those situations are able to, take control, guide, be having a proactive approach, and then with that, what they're able to do is basically manage a particular situation and bring it to a closure. So in this case, a successful closure of a complaint or handling of that complaint. Now, if we have to differentiate at this juncture, what I would say is, let's also, after having a bit of a background in terms of, understanding where a manager works or where a leader works, let's look at a few subtle differences in terms of where you see situations wherein a manager would be more apt, and where you see a leader would be, stepping in to take that role. Now, when we look at differences, I've only summarized a few on the slide, but there are loads of differences that we can discuss. Now, if we look at, some of the differences, some of the differences are put together as bullet points, but without going into them, if I look at, sometimes we relate that we all use smartphones nowadays. So if you look at 3 or 4 very successful companies which have smartphones as products, there are 2 or 3 names which come to your mind. One is, you think of Apple. Second, you think of, for example, Samsung. And the third is, you maybe think of, say Nokia, which is no longer there, but maybe another brand like Lenovo or Huawei. Now, when you look at some of these brands, and the people who are at the helm of that brand in terms of leading the company, what we do get to see at some stages at people, who set the overall direction of where the company is headed. People who have a bit of a vision and have the long-term view of the organization in mind in terms of business strategy, revenue, growth, markets they want to expand in. You would normally see that these are people who are in leadership position because they look at things more objectively. They look at things which are long-term. They look at things which are more qualitatively, and some of the objectives and targets that they set typically are always, long-term. Now, long-term could be 12 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and this kind of a timeline actually varies depending on the organization that we pick up, for example, in our discussion. So if I look at long-term, when we look at companies like Samsung, Apple, and some of the large companies who are in telecom space and bring out products, they look at long-term as 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years. And in this work within the leadership positions, they tend to have a very long-term view in terms of how the organization is going to bring out products or products which will lead to new revenue streams. And then look at people who work within various, front office, various departments, various places where the organization has the opportunity to meet up or face customers, you would normally see people who work in those positions would be people who are very good at managing situations. So there, when we look at the subtle differences between the two, you see people on a day-to-day basis managing activities, tasks which are given, and day-to-day objectives which have to be met. You look at people who are put into that position would be people who are good with managerial, who are managers, and they'll have managerial skills to be able to manage that particular situation. But when you look at people who decide that this is a product that is going to be brought out, or this is a new feature that we need to be introducing in the product, they would be the ones who would be maybe in the background, and they would be in a position wherein they think long term, and they're kind of, cut out from or kind of alienated to a certain extent from people who work within on a day-to-day or on a weekly, monthly target basis. So that helps. If you look at this particular context, that helps to set a bit of a scenario to understand how do we do a differentiation between the two, between a manager and a leader. So managers tend to supervise things, and leaders tend to be more motivated in getting other people behind them to do things. So when we look at managers, they basically look at creating opportunities which will allow more and more colleagues to come in and take up that role. But when you look at managers, they tend to in some cases have a control on the particular situation, and they do not let go easily of that position or that situation because they feel that their absolute power in terms of managing those things is being taken away. Sometimes you will see that people who work within frontline positions and are able to understand the implementation of things. So you would see people who are at the front desk will normally be paying more attention to the system, the legislation, and the basis of how things need to be better managed. So for example, if I look at an operation of a store, for example, let's look at the Tesco stores. You will normally see a manager or a set of managers having the keys to open the store on time, making sure that the shift patterns are planned. But when we look at and step back to somebody who's managing these side of store operations from the head office, that would be a person who has prior experience of doing all these things, but also has a long-term view in terms of how he needs to better manage and put processes and policies in place to better manage these operations of the stores. Now, not one store, but maybe say Tesco has about 4,500, 5,000 stores in the UK. So how to better manage, plan, inventory, and there's a large team which does that. So people who are in the back end would be having a view in terms of not just looking at one store, but looking at many stores, and that is where their drive would be to get attention in terms of getting people motivated, to work and carry out that work, on a day in, day out, weekly, monthly, annual, yearly basis. And there are other differences that can be brought in, and for which what I'm give you a bit of a handout to you, because there are about 20-25 differences between managers and leaders in today's context. And depending on the situation or the example that we pick up, some of these roles or differences can interchange as well, depending on the size of the organization, the situation that you look at, and in some cases, also looking at the operations of the organization. If you're a very small business, you will normally see that the person who's the owner, maybe the director, is also the manager and also the leader, because he thinks long term. He's the one who decides the vision of the company. But when you start looking at larger organizations, you will see that these differences become paramount. And at some stage, you will have people who will manage day-to-day situations, and there'll be somebody who will be sitting back, thinking strategically, and that person would basically be looking at long-term view, and that person, he or she, that whosoever may that be, would be looking at exhibiting skills of being a leader or leading that organization. Now, before we go into understanding theories, which I've summarized in a few slides, let's look at recapping on some of the skills which are required, to say that I'm a person in leadership position, or this person could make a good leader, or this person exhibits what you call, leadership traits. Now, there are loads of research which has been done over the years. Something that I've picked up from skillsyouneed.com website kind of nails it on the spot is because it picks out the key 6 attributes which people need to have when they look at saying that I am a leader or I am in a position wherein I want to lead the organization. So these are the skills that these people, exhibit very, very, clearly. Now, the first thing that we look at is related to what I've spoken earlier. When we say long term, these people have, the ability to think strategically. That means they're able to mend and manage, chop and change the mission and the vision of the company and have a very good understanding of where they want the business to go, where they want the company or the organization to go. And they are visionaries to a certain extent because they have the, uncanny ability of looking into the crystal ball and seeing to a certain extent with experience. Now, this is not literally saying that they have a crystal ball, but they have the ability to be able to think strategically, to say that this is where the organization needs to head, this is the market condition, or this is where the political climate is, and this is what the company needs to aptly do now to be able to look at surviving or have a viable future. So these people, because of the experience that they have from a number of years of working, and also the the traits that we discussed, things like which will be in the skills analysis, have they are able to basically think strategically. So here they have a long-term view in mind, and that long-term view, when I say they have it in mind, is they are able to think beyond, or as we use the term, out of the box. Now, the other thing that we also look at is that thinking is one thing. You can think of an idea, you can think of a good plan, you can think of, until you put it into some sort of an action, that means until you start implementing it, there is no way that you would know whether this will be successful or not. So people in leadership positions, exhibiting leadership skills, have a very good hold on planning and delivery. They know exactly how to connect the dots and cross the T's. They have very good understanding of the business, the market environment, which is internal and external factors, but they also have a very good understanding in terms of where the competitor setup is or how the competitors are going to react. So when we look at planning and delivery, they know very clearly how they need to look at achieving a particular goal. And sometimes, I should say, in most cases, not sometimes, in most cases, they know what are the challenges they're going to face along the way as they go along and do that planning to achieve that vision. Now, we look at communication. When we look at communication, communication is a skill which everybody needs to have. It's a skill which people can have at different levels. Even managers require that skill when you work within an organization. It's a generic skill. But when we look at communication skills, we are looking at the specific aspect of interpersonal skills, which are not leadership specific, but those are skills which the leaders are able to use and emphasize when they look at doing communication. So they are the ones which are able to write maybe a motivating speech or an email, or write a congratulatory message. It's not that others cannot write, but I'm saying they know there's a time and there's there's a right time and there's a right place to show these skills, and this comes across when they use communication as one of the strengths to show basically that they are good leaders or are in a leadership position. Other things basically include things like people management. That means they have an ability to be able to manage people, motivate them, get engagement from people, and they are able to create that loyalty factor by creating policies and procedures which allows and makes people follow them. That means people look up to them in terms of the things they say or the things they do, and that also is a trait or an ability which leaders need to exhibit. We do see persuasion and influence, which is sometimes when you get into a debate, and you get into a debate, people tend to agree to disagree. Sometimes you have a strong debate with a few colleagues within a team, but you will generally see that people sometimes they are persuasive, but they are also persuasive in the sense that they have the knowledge and they are able to get you on their side when they are putting their argument forward, and that allows them to basically not just win conversations, but to a certain extent also create an influence by putting forward right arguments, which allows them to show that, okay, these are the advantages of doing this, and they've done their homework in a sense, but it allows them to bring that forward. And persuasion and influence is one of the key things which you will see that people in leadership position, clearly exhibit. And last but not the least, change management. Change is the only ever constant. So when we say, things are changing, and to adapt to change, sometimes you will see that people, are brought into positions from external organizations or recruited externally because the organization needs to undergo change. And that person needs to be brought in externally, sometimes as a change agent or a change consultant, and that person has a very clear understanding of how they need to recognize, respond, and manage different people and different arguments, when the change is going to be implemented. So sometimes you will see within organizations, if the organization has taken a stance that, okay, we will be looking at reducing this, or we'll be looking at, for example, I give you a very specific example, like if an organization decides that we're going to switch to Windows 10 or we're going to switch to Apple, and over a point in time there'll be a phase-wise delivery of within different offices to make that transition from a Windows-based platform to an Apple, or vice versa. Now, that would make a lot of employees or people within the organization slightly uncomfortable, because they would have to restart. Some of them might not have knowledge about this. The HR would put some practice in place to look at learning and development, or training and development essentially for employees. But even after that, you will see that people will resist, saying, I know why this change has been brought across and things like that. So in some cases, you will see that people in the leadership position have the ability to be able to persuade, influence, and bring that change positively. So they are able to make people embrace that change, and that change seems to be a bit of a quality which leaders exhibit, because they know when is the right time to bring that change, and when is the right time to actually force that change. Bring is one thing, which is basically a transition, but when is the right time to force that change? You look at the news day before yesterday, or I think yesterday, when we see Jaguar Land Rover, they've decided to lay off 5,000 employees. Now that's a very, very difficult decision to make for an organization, because they do see that the markets globally are slowing down, and the sales of that particular car or model of a particular car is slowing down. So having to cut and make redundancies for 5,000 employees is not a decision which a manager would take, or is a decision which a particular department would take. But that is a consolidated decision which is taken by the top management. But finally, that has to be signed off by somebody, and that might have been signed off by either the chief HR officer or by the chief executive, to say that we need to make maybe better viable chances, or more viable chances of being profitable in the coming years, and that's where this change is now being brought across. So they're cutting, making redundancies by laying off staff, and that is an example of change management which can only be signaled from, or signaled off, or signed off by people who are within the leadership position. So any questions on what we've covered so far?
No.
No, it's okay. It's very much clear.
Okay, that's great.
It's okay.
Okay, thanks, Ernest. Thank you. So let's look at now, getting into, with a bit of a background, the leadership theories. We need to understand, some theoretical frameworks at this stage. And these theoretical frameworks, we will need to refer to, because sometimes when we look at referring to, I'm pretty sure that everybody has heard or at some point in time read things like, this person that I work with as a manager has an autocratic style, or this person that I work with, has a democratic style. This person is quite approachable. This person that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, is quite nosy. So when you look at all these things, why do we look at analyzing or getting into these things in terms of detail, is that we want to know, how to be able to deal with these situations. So sometimes what we need to be able to do is understand the background in terms of how these theories and frameworks have come about. Now, leadership and management, as I said before when I started the session, is a vast field. There has been extensive research which has happened over the years, and there are loads of theories which have been put forward, which are classified under leadership and management theories. So let's look at the consolidated group of theories, because there are lots of authors, people, scientists which have carried out research from the late 1960s up until the 21st century, and the research is ongoing. But what they have done over the years is that we've kind of now grouped some of these theories under 4 basic core groups. Now, one of the group is trait theories, the other is behavioral theories, the third is contingency, and the fourth is power and influence theories. So let's look at briefly with one slide each what these theories actually mean. Now, trait theories, looking at just reading the first bullet, is that what we feel that what makes a good leader, or what is when a person exhibits qualities, what are they showing? They are showing certain traits which basically make other people either follow them, imitate them, or instinctively, go after them. So basically, these were studies which were done in the earlier years, and here the basic concept was that people who are in leadership positions are born with certain characteristics, traits, skills, or they have it in their personality, and that's why these people need to be in leadership position. And these ideas were challenged over the years, and trait theories were kind of sidelined to a certain extent, and we went into the second aspect of what we see is called behavioral theories. So here, the trait theories, essentially, if I read just 1 or 2 bullet points, basically talked about effective leaders share a number of common traits or characteristics. And these characteristics are innate or instinctive qualities which you either have or do not have. So if you have a quality of taking risk, if you have a quality of looking at long-term vision, if you have a quality of, making people, winning arguments, making people follow you, they say that you were either born with it or not born with it. And because of which, they said that these are called, these are traits which people exhibit, and because of which they need to be in kind of guaranteed leadership positions. Now, the second set of theories that we looked at were, theories which were called behavioral theories. Now, these behavioral theories essentially focused on how people in positions of power actually behave. That means when you become a leader, when you are leading an organization or a business or a particular, let's say a business unit, you exhibit certain behavior, and that behavior basically puts you out as a leader. So these theories and frameworks were essentially proposed by a scientist called Kurt Lewin in the 1930s, and he came up with a framework which was called the leadership behavior framework. And he argued that there are different types of leaders depending on what kind of behaviors they exhibit. Now, sometimes you will see, if I just go full screen, sometimes you will see that this categorization of leaders into autocratic, democratic, laissez-faire, spans into 5 different types as well. But generally, he classified that leaders are of 3 types. People who want to make the decisions without, either consulting with somebody, or their style of leadership is that they want to reach and make decisions quickly without getting inputs or, any feedback from people who would be affected from them. The second is when we look at, which is democratic leaders, people who allow, if you are maybe a team leader, say, for example, a call center, if you work within a call center as a manager, and you manage a team of 15, 20 agents, sometimes when they have weekly meetings, the team manager would actually look at, in this case, you have to kind of look at a slightly bigger scenario, is that you have a call center which has maybe 10, 15 team leaders. Each team leader manages a team of 10 to 12 customer service agents. The person who's managing the floor, maybe the general manager or something, is the person who's actually leading that team, because he is tasked with bringing an output in terms of either a customer satisfaction index at the end of the day or end of the week, or required to generate an X number of inquiries if it's a sales or a marketing call center, or if it's a troubleshooting call center, that means if you are getting calls to support the customers, he needs to be able to win support. So he sets out a lot of targets. So here, that person can effectively get people to work for him if he takes input from the team leaders and also from some exceptional colleagues which work within the team, different teams under the team leaders. So here, the democratic style of leadership is defined by the fact that the person, before making a final decision, allows for inputs to come in from colleagues or people within his team that he's delegating the job to, so that he has a buy-in from that team to make that task or that objective successful. Now, the third type that he identified, Kurt, when he identified the third one, is a French word called laissez-faire. And what he said was, these kind of leaders do not interfere with things. They allow people or people within their teams to manage and make decisions depending on the situation being faced. So they are incapable to a certain extent in terms of making decisions. But what they tend to do is, they tend to have an overall, view of the situation, and do not let the situation go, let's put it this way, do not let the situation, trying to use the right word. So what they tend to do in this case would be, they have a good understanding of what the situation and the risk is, but in some cases, they fail to take the right decisions because what they do is they believe in total delegation. That's the right word. So they believe in total delegation, that they will leave the decision making also to the people working within the teams. And when we look at this particular framework of leadership actually falls within the framework of behavioral theories, because here, depending on the behavior the person is exhibiting, they classify the leaders according to the behavior being exhibited. Is that okay?
Yes.
Now, when we look at contingency theories, now what are contingency theories? Here, the leader will actually be, it's a combination of trait and behavioral theories. Here, the leader will behave in a way wherein, depending on the type of situation being faced. And to a certain extent, one of the two theories do not work. So here, what we do get to see is that there's an amalgamation of the two theories, the traits and the behavior, and you will see leaders actually reacting to or being proactive to a situation to handle it, to resolve it, to solve it. But the leadership they show is actually dependent on the situation being faced. So in this case, we look at two separate theories which have been, which have kind of come out of the research which has been done over the years, and they tend to be something called the path goal theory and the Feedlers contingency model. Now, these theories essentially, as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm going to send you a bit of a handout because there are about 18 theories in general, if I don't group them into these 4 groups that I've looked at. But what we need to be able to do is, because the assessment task would focus on your evaluation of leadership theories, you would need to understand that there are so many of these theories. They are used in certain contexts and certain situations. They have come out after a lot of research, over the years. And what we want to be able to do is do a bit of comparison or evaluation to see which one works in what situation. So when we look at the path goal theory, here the managers tend to concentrate on, setting a path, and they give a goal to the team. And the decisions are primarily based on the fact that, if the team is walking the path and obviously following the path easily, or, is able to, what they're trying to see is that goal going to be achievable if they take that path? And if they take that path and the goal is achievable, then, that is something they don't need to refine or don't need to change. But if they see that this path is not being, is not going to be successful, then what they end up doing is that they look at a course correction, and that is why it's a path goal theory. When we look at the Feedlers, contingency model, we basically look at a combination of 3 things which will be applied in this case. One would be the borrowing of the leadership styles from behavioral model, the situation on which the foundation of the contingency theory hinges, and last but not the least, the behavioral connection between the leadership styles and the situation. That would basically be something which defines Feedlers contingency model. An example of that would be that we get to see in day-to-day life is you will normally see, again, I'll go back to the example of the store wherein you are an unhappy customer and you're having a discussion with the customer service executive or the person in the front desk saying that I'm not happy with this purchase and all that. There is somebody who's observing that behavior when you're at the returns desk or when you're at that desk when it's being done. At some stage, the colleague who's not able to handle that situation, presses a button, and you have a manager or a person who's his supervisor or maybe somebody who's senior who's managing the number of people on that counter comes across and starts to have a discussion with you. So here, that person is primarily going to look at exhibiting a style of leadership wherein what are the things that the person is expected to do? One, he's supposed to be able to get hold of the situation, to calm it down, and then drive that, drive such a decision that will help solve that problem and, close that situation which has arisen. That means the customer being unhappy or customer being, not happy with that particular product, and then, he has to give a resolution. The colleague at the counter is not able to do that because he or she does not have the authority. So if it's a return which has to be done, it has to be authorized by the manager. So what you get to see there is the exact practical implication of a contingency theory, is because without knowing what is the situation or the gravity of the situation, the person comes in, the manager or the person who comes in shows a bit of leadership here to say that, okay, I need to solve this situation. He looks at getting some feedback from the colleague, looks at the situation, and then between a combination of what he's got as a feedback and the situation, he solves that problem by looking at, putting a contingency, looking at dealing with that contingency. And here, that contingency basically is looking at dealing with is to basically end up solving that situation. So contingency theories, in short, tend to be a combination of trait and behavioral theories, and they are grouped into the third group of theories that we need to be aware of. The last one that we look at is basically power and influence theories. Now, here, what we are trying to understand is that sometimes when you say people in a leadership position wield power, and that's a phrase or a acronym that we've come across a number of times. And what we do get to see is that people in positions of leadership also get access to power to be able to make decisions or to be able to take decisions. And here, what we are looking at is that power and influence, basically sometimes in the hands of some persons can have a very different, outcome with regards to, in the hands of some different people, where they would exercise it in a different way. So what we do get to see in this case is that when we look at talking about the fourth group of power and influence theories, here we see that sometimes people will, use their position to take certain decisions which could benefit themselves or it could benefit the organization. They could be taken from an aspect of, winning over a particular situation, or in some cases, be to a certain extent, let's put it this way, favorable to a type of, a particular group or a particular department. So the power and influence theories basically, say that sometimes you will see that leadership styles also get affected by how much of position, how much of power is concentrated in a position. And some of the theories on which this, this particular group hinges on is the French and Raven's 5 norm of power. So this is a particular model that we look at in these theories, wherein, when we talk about this here, this is where the example comes from. Now let's go into one other thing, which is understand, the emerging concept of leadership, specifically in the case of 21st century leadership, or the concept of our present times. Now, there are, over the years, these are the 4 groups, but apart from that, what we've also seen is that if we have to look at leadership, there are 2 other approaches which have come up, and they are called transformational and transactional. Now, these are 2 types of leaderships which people can exhibit in the leadership position, and because of the nature of the way they actually show leadership, has a direct bearing on the type of leadership they are actually enacting. So when you look at transactional leadership, here the approach actually assumes, I'm going to read from the slide, basically assumes that people do things to get reward and for no other reason. So if you are given a target, if you work within sales, if you are working within a position wherein there is a carrot and stick approach, or there is an approach wherein there's a reward management system in place, whether it's in the form of incentive, bonus, trips, holidays, things like that. Different organizations have different incentive schemes. There the people are motivated because of the fact that there is a reward that they're going to get at the end of the task being achieved. And that's why sometimes when you look at HR departments, when they design tasks, or when they look at, giving away targets, annual targets, or, key result areas, they always look at the concept of some sort of a reward management system in place, which would mean that if you achieve 100%, you get this. If you achieve over 125%, you get this. So how do we differentiate this? If you look at across the year, all employees working within an organization would have a performance appraisal. That performance appraisal would look at measuring you against the benchmarks which were given in terms of key result areas. And if you've achieved those key result areas, you have a good appraisal, and that brings you in line with, depending on where you are within the hierarchy within the organization, for a minimum incentive or a reward, which is a pay rise. Now, if you've overachieved your objectives, and those objectives are linked to the strategic objectives of the organization, sometimes you get certain amount of bonus which is not given across, because pay increases might happen across the organization, but bonus and incentives which are over and above the pay increase might happen for certain individuals. The third aspect could be if you have been working within a particular position for a number of years and have been consistently showing performance and achieving objectives, you might be in line for a promotion. So that also differentiates from the type of reward that you might get against the others which have been working within similar roles, but maybe have been only performing at 100%, or there are gap areas, and that is why they don't qualify for this. And if I look at this in a middle management or a senior management position, that would mean that apart from getting the pay rise, apart from getting the the bonus, apart from getting the promotion, you might also get an increase in role and responsibility. You might also get, say, employee stock option plans. So you get stocks from the company, or you get shares from the company saying that these can be divested, and they disproportionately give you a reward mechanism, because the organization is trying to retain you. The organization is trying to obviously develop you as a future leader, and those kind of things that we look at when we look at these reward structures relating to the behavior which the individuals are exhibiting and are bringing out the best, are related to something which is a concept called transactional leadership. And this you get to see in all customer services organizations, or all organizations or businesses which are customer oriented, because here the carrot and stick approach works is because you need to be able to maximize revenues, basically look after your customers, and the more you look after your customers and you maximize revenue, there are reward mechanisms which are in place and which help people exhibit the transactional style or day-to-day style of leadership to be able to come out on top in that particular situation. Now the other flip side would be transformational. Now when I look at transformational, this tends to be long-term, and an example that I would give you here would be, if you look at certain organizations which have had a bit of a rebound, that means because of the change of business strategy, or because of change of leadership, or because of change in management. When we see that, why does an organization, why does a business or an organization needs to adapt that change, or bring that kind of a resolute change? That needs to be done because maybe the organization needs to reinvent, or a business needs to re-look at re-strategizing, re-look at how they are going to market. And in those cases, you will see people who would help transform this would be people who come in with a lot of experience, background, and a long-term vision. That means they have had previous experience and have had, kind of faced or dealt with previous situations wherein they are able to basically, come in and do that work of transforming the organization. An example that I would give here primarily would be, from the fact that when you see a lot of large global companies, we look at before the Apple and sticking to that same example of Apple and Samsung, before the smartphone came out, PCs used to dominate everything. And we knew that there were 3 or 4 big companies globally like Hewlett-Packard or HP. We looked at IBM, we looked at Lenovo, we looked at Dell Computers. Now, when the switch began to happen, some of these companies were caught on surprise. And what we felt was that some of these companies started to make losses. They were losing market share, things like that. And in one particular example that I would give you is, say, for example, Michael Dell, who's the founder chairman of Dell Computers. Dell, kind of outstripped everybody in the market because they had a model wherein you could, order computers and they could be delivered in 2 or 3 days, to your place or to your home address. And he started losing market share. What Michael Dell did was, in 2014, he took the company private, bought the company, and took it off their market. And the organization, which is transformed.
To hear you properly.
Sorry, they've transformed the organization. So when he took it private, that means he bought the company and took it off the share market, listing in, what he did was he reoriented the business to make it in line with what the current requirements are. So they've gone into not just PCs now, but they've gone into data warehousing, data storage, virtualization, loads of other things which are current, and that would keep the company going. So in this case, the leadership shown by Michael Dell is transformational because he has been at the helm of a company which he started for 26 years. Became the chairman, left the company, and then after a few years came back, took the company private, took it out of the investors' hand, and then transformed the company by giving it a new direction. And that's why you see Dell still, trading in the market today rather than being one of the names which went away. So I don't know how many of you remember Compaq, which was a brand bought over by Hewlett-Packard, and when you look at Lenovo taking over the IBM brand. So they've kept the IBM brand, but essentially IBM is being wiped out of the PC business. So people realize that some of the leaders in which were in these companies, they realized that the time. Let me put it this way: PC would be one of the screens that would be used to access information, but will not be the only screen. But up until I would say 2007, 2010, 2008, PC was the only screen. But now you have a computer in your hand, which is a smartphone, and the whole market has moved to smartphones. So when you look at that concept of leadership shown by some of the people working within these organizations who created these organizations or businesses, successful businesses, they have shown transformational leadership because of the strategic planning, the vision they have shown. They've taken back control and they've reoriented the company's long-term strategy of products and product mix to give them a new life. And obviously this concept in the 21st century is now differentiated as transactional and transformational leadership. So let's look at doing a bit of a conclusion today in terms of the discussion that we've done. I know it's gone slightly just over an hour, but just trying to keep it sharpish. Let's look at the conclusion. Now, when we talk about leadership, when we talk about management, we need to clearly understand a couple of things. One, how do we differentiate between the definition of calling somebody a leader or saying somebody or calling somebody as a manager? So we need to clearly know the differences between the two. The second is we need to understand some frameworks of how the leadership concept has emerged, and that can be studied from the 4 core group of theories which have been grouped together to understand it in the modern context. The third thing that we need to be able to do is we need to be able to clearly identify how do we assess that a person has leadership skills, or how do we say that the person has management skills. And that is where the skill analysis needs to be done. And we need to be very clear in terms of saying these are the skills or traits which the leaders exhibit. These are the skills and traits which the managers exhibit. And that is something which needs to be categorically understood when we study the concept of leadership and management. Last but not the least, what we want to be able to do is, from our own aspect, we need to understand what is the leadership style you exhibit, and what is the leadership style that you are comfortable working with when you work with peer colleagues, within your organization or within a particular business that you work in. And that will help you identify the skills, the trait, the behavior, and the attitude that you show when you act as a leader, or maybe show leadership skills in a particular situation. And if we are able to get that nailed, if we are able to understand that, then we clearly know that we've understood the first learning outcome, which is to understand what is leadership and what is management, and how do we look at differentiating between the two, and to a certain extent understand what are the challenges that current organizations or leaders face in 21st century modern organizations. Is that okay?
Yes.
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 Very clear.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if you have a couple of seconds, I'm going to try and, because we've talked about a lot of things today in terms of jargon and a bit of abstract, which I'm not quite happy with, to be honest, because it's a wide-ranging topic. There has to be a bit of reading that you need to do at your own, convenient time, to try and basically crystallize some of this, what we've discussed, with the use of some slides today. Now, very briefly, let's look at two organizations. I'm going to try and pick out UK organizations because, one, I'm familiar with. Second, I think in the context of we understanding leadership and management, it will be quicker if we pick out organizations which are, organizations that we are aware of.
Yeah.
Let's look at Tesco, just one of the retailers. Let's look at the big four. Let's pick out Tesco, and let's look at, say, a voluntary organization or a charity like British Red Cross, for example, Red Cross. Now, if we look at the two organizations, I can, even while talking about it, I have certain key differences which I've already started coming to my mind in terms of how do I perceive these organizations. There could be things like, one is a private sector, the other is a charity. So I'm trying to now to apply my logic. The other is, when I look at the leadership style, which will be present in Tesco, because it's a private sector organization, it is run as a business, it has to be profitable. There is a certain leadership style or type of style which will be attributed with people who are in the management position. But when I look at a charity, their purposes of being in existence is something different. They look at continuation, they look at providing services, they look at working on certain aspects of providing service without an expectation. And they, to a certain extent, would be funded or dependent on charities which people, governments, various international agencies, provide. So when you look at the two organizations, what we need to be able to understand is the differences between the two in terms of how they are driven. So the leadership style would be different, the style of management of these organizations would be different, and it also comes from the fact when we look at the basic core of the organization that one of them is a private sector and the other is a charity. One of them is listed on a stock exchange, the other is purely funded by governmental activities or funds which private donors or people do in terms of donations. So when you look at these two, and if you maybe pick out two organizations as a tip, when you look at the learning outcome one, just pick out two and start looking at these differences, which will help you understand the concept of management and leadership, because there are very clear differences in the way these organizations are run or they are managed. And when you look at that, I think it will help you understand the concept of leadership and management that we are looking at studying today in learning outcome one. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any questions on this so far?
No, thank you very much for it was very good.
No, that's fine.
And
Okay,
I
That's
think
fine.
it's very clear actually. The last two was very interesting. The last two style was very interesting. And thank you.
Okay, good stuff. Now, what I'm going to do is just after the session, I'm going to send you this presentation and the slides that I've put together. And these slides primarily will be accompanied with one or two handouts, which are about 5 to 7 pages long. And one of the handouts that I'm going to send across, as I showed to you, was this particular comprehensive skill analysis handout. And the other would be the leadership and management theories handout. It's about 13, 14 pages, but it summarizes all the theories. And hopefully that handout will be helpful for you to do your assignment as well, covering up these tasks that we have discussed today, with regards to the learning outcomes. And I will catch up with you, tomorrow at the same time when we look at, talking about some of these, getting into basically the learning outcome 2, which is to understand.
Sorry, when's the next one?
Tomorrow, same time at 6 p.m.
Tomorrow at 6 p.m.
No, not tomorrow. Say next week. Sorry.
Next Friday.
Next week, Friday.
Yes. Okay.
Next Friday.
Okay, no worries. So all of you have a good weekend. Thanks for joining the session today. And if you have any questions, queries, please, by all means, drop me a quick email, and I will respond back to you within 2 hours.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.